I was in college, I was first learning about gender fluidity through the author Kate Bornstein. I went to a lecture she was giving, and she handed out a multiple choice quiz and invited the entire audience to take it during the lecture. Now, at the time, I was 18 years old, and I was a transplant to New York City from Racine, Wisconsin, a little factory town of about 100,000 people. And when I got to college, I earnestly joined the Women's Center, and I went to all the topics and the talks about gender and identity, including this one by an author who had just written a famous book called Gender Outlaw, and was promoting her new book called My Gender Workbook. I was excited. It was a cute book. It was bright pink, hot pink, and it looked like a composition notebook. Except on the corner, it had a half Barbie, half Ken doll with overlapping Venn diagrams between them. I felt like I was in the hip place, you know? We were taking a quiz during the lecture. And to be honest, the quiz made no sense to me. It had questions like, check which one of the following describes you most accurately. A, I'm a real man. B, I'm a real woman. C, I'm not a real man or a real woman, but I'd like to be. D, none of the above. I am something else entirely. D. Now, I was in a place in my life where I had just been cracked open to the painful differences in the life experiences of men and of women, and I was in a place where those categories held a lot of weight for me. I experienced them as power and differential power in the world. And the quiz, the rest of the quiz, which was like 50 more questions like that, included those experiences, those differences, but it also included experiences that were news to me. Experiences that were in addition to the binary definitions of men and women. Experiences that fell somewhere between the power hierarchies of those two poles. I was disoriented, but I tried to play it cool, so I kept on learning. In the article, The Relevance of Gender for Eliminating Weapons of Mass Destruction, you guys can look that up in case you want to read about that later. Carol Cohn, with Felicity Phil and Sarah Ruddick, writes that gender goes beyond actual human bodies and experiences and acts in our world as a symbolic system. A system in which binary pairs are both dichotomous and mutually exclusive. And in this pervasive symbolic system, the masculine side of the binary system is more highly valued than the feminine side. And both halves of these pairs are understood and defined in their contrast to one another. So I'll read some examples from the Cohn article of these mutually exclusive hierarchic pairs. So in each pair that I read, the first half is going to be associated with the masculine, while the second half is with the feminine. Thought, emotion. Active, passive. Rational, irrational. Strength, weakness. Mind, body. Courage, fear. Serious, playful. Concrete, abstract. Doer, done. Reality, appearance. Science, humanities. Philosophy, myth. Order, chaos. Permanent, ephemeral. Dominant, subordinate. Confident, insecure. Simplicity, complexity. Truth, fiction. Classical, romantic. Teacher, student. Kohn argues that our binary gender system goes beyond gender and helps define a binary way of understanding the world. The philosopher Michel Foucault argued that power is diffuse, it's dispersed, it's everywhere. It's both within and between and among the poles of the binary, but it acts in different ways depending on where it's at. So I like to imagine power as like space-time, a sort of matrix in which all matter and all things and all beings exist, and the larger, heavier objects just bend that space-time a little bit more. Within the matrix, there are axes of power, fault lines along which power runs, with one side of the fault line having heavier power than the other. So gender is one of these fault lines, but there are others that are also set up as binaries, like rich, poor, white people, people of color, male, female, cis, trans, straight, queer. We could keep doing the binaries, right? You get it. So we all live in this power matrix. We're all embedded in it. And Foucault argued that it is enforced less through brute coercion and more through a social turned internal policing. So Foucault likened it to a prison in which there are no bars and no weapons, and possibly not even any guards. This metaphoric prison contains a guard tower that looks out on all of the prisoners all of the time. Foucault called this the panopticon. The prison is in the round, with the giant tower in its center above the prisoners so that the guards are looking out and looking down and can see all of the different cells simultaneously, but none of the prisoners can see up into the tower. In this way, the prisoners are controlled through the implied gaze, G-A-Z-E, of the guards, whether or not there are actually any guards in the tower, and whether or not any of those supposed guards are actually watching any of the prisoners. The prisoners come to control themselves because they believe that they're being watched, because the system is set up to give them the sense of being watched all the time. The prison comes to exist and exert its control through the prisoner's mind. So this is the metaphor that Foucault uses to describe modern society. With the constant sense of being watched, we have become our own jailer. We police our behavior ourselves. We don't need to be controlled with weapons or with bars. A security camera, whether or not it is on, whether or not anyone is actually watching it, is enough to make us control ourselves. We know the normative standards of behavior, and for the most part, we choose to obey them. We have the sense that we're being watched all the time, but we don't necessarily know by whom. It is our sense of who those watchers might be, the fact that they exist, but also what they might be thinking, that guides our behavior. But the watchers are actually just in our heads. We've constructed who we think they are based on our observations of the world and how we believe that world works. We respond to our own assumptions. And those assumptions are in a constant interplay, interacting with our observations of the world on a daily basis. And then we perform and behave and affect the world. And it goes back and forth. A few years ago, I was cooking dinner with my best friend, who is also a bisexual, cisgendered femme, and a minister who's about my age. So we were making roasted chicken, and she had basted it with oil and rosemary, which is already way beyond my own cooking comfort zone. And when she pulled the innards out of this chicken, she said, "Now, if we were real women, we would boil these and make chicken stock." So I was already out in this crazy rosemary oil basting land of womanhood, so I said, let's do it. And we did, and we both ended up getting food poisoning and having to throw out the rest of the chicken along with the stock and all of the mess that we made. But when she said, now if we were real women, we would, I both knew exactly what she meant and also had no idea. She was talking about this other pole, this pole over here of the real woman, which I know instinctively, I know through my long history of gender training as a woman, and I sometimes try to perform to greater or lesser degrees of success. Our concepts of what it means to be a real man or a real woman, what it means to be a man or a woman at all, and what that means for our behavior, our performance of man or woman, is both internally and externally constructed. We watch. We watch the world, and we watch ourselves, and we watch ourselves being watched. And then we model our behavior on what we discover. We do this through both imitation and through rejection. Yes, I am this. No, I am not that. We react to and we repeat the binary and all the stops in between. We perceive others' locations on that binary spectrum, and we judge them and interact with them accordingly, according to what we assume their location is. We are both the watchers and we are the watched. With our gaze, we recreate the prison both internally and externally. We are both the prisoners and the guards simultaneously. This past week, the second Wachowski sibling of the famous producer-director pair came out as a transgender woman. The Wachowski siblings are famous for their work creating the Matrix films, V for Vendetta, and Cloud Atlas, among others. Lily Wachowski, the woman who just came out, has reportedly transitioned from living as a man to living as a woman, and has been living as a woman for the past year or so. Lily's sister Lana came out as a transgender woman in 2012. And in Chicago's Windy City Times this week, Lily wrote, "These words, transgender and transitioned, are hard for me because they both have lost their complexity in their assimilation to the mainstream. There's a lack of nuance of time and of space. To be transgender is something largely understood as existing within the dogmatic terminus of male or female. And to transition imparts a sense of immediacy, a before and an after from one terminus to the other. But the reality, my reality, is that I've been transitioning and will continue to transition my entire life through the infinite that exists between male and female, as it does in the infinite between the binary of 0 and of 1. We need to elevate the dialogue beyond the simplicity of the binary. Binary is a false idol. In our media-saturated, constant surveillance culture unfolding process, the process of becoming is collapsed into a single snapshot or a headline. The movement and the fluid that we all experience in life is frozen in a single still. This person was a man. This person is a woman. The snapshot doesn't encompass the infinite existence between the poles of the binary or the infinite existence of the full rest of our lives. We all move every day through our lives, but in surveillance culture we have this idea that the single moment in which we experience another human being, or the moment that they get caught on camera or ensnared in a headline, is the whole of them. It collapses complexity and time and movement. The rigidity of the binary can also capture our minds. When we only see the two poles, but we don't see the space and movement in between them and among them because there are multiple poles, when we don't see the interstitial space between the poles, the liminal space of moving from one place to the next, we are missing a huge part of life. When I was an 18-year-old student in New York City taking that first gender quiz, even the concept of something in between, the concept of something between a man and a woman was disorienting for me. When we are mesmerized and transfixed by a constructed binary, the multi, the space of complexity and multiple identities occurring simultaneously just disappears. The poles alone, binary, mutually exclusive, hierarchical, don't allow for fluidity. They don't allow for our entire selves. They don't allow for us to be present in more than one identity, in more than one place, in more than one version of ourselves. They force a single story, flat, that reduces our varied and human complexity. My beloved mentor, the Sheikh Dr. Ibrahim Farajai, or to me, Ibrahim Baba, was a scholar of interstitial spaces. Ibrahim was supposed to join us in October for my ordination to do the laying on of hands, but he was too ill to travel. And this past month in February, Ibrahim Baba shocked us all by passing away. He left us for the beloved. And in his illness and now death, I had the privilege of witnessing all the lives that he touched around the world in the outpouring of love and support from every corner for him. This world is less bright without the big love of Ibrahim, with his leonine grace and a large, beautiful, dark-skinned body, his loud, hearty laugh that you could hear across a busy airport, his loving heart that embraced all beings and all ways of being. His family set up a care page during his illness that included a section called Photo Prayers for Baba. And photos flowed in from all across the world. A Jewish and Sufi altar in Turkey, a wedding in India, a sunset over the ocean and the cliffs in California. The people doing the praying were Reform Jews. They were multi-ethnic Sufis. They were witches in California. They were Unitarian Universalists around the United States. Baba touched the hearts of people who crossed lines and upset categories. He ministered to people around the world living in interstitial spaces. He taught us to say yes and, always making room for more complexity, more multiplicity, more humanity. One of Ibrahim Baba's mentees, Dr. H. Sharif Harakuti Williams, memorialized him this past month in an article on Huffington Post. The author remembers publishing an essay of Ibrahim's called Fictions of Purity. Baba was always talking to us about fictions of purity, this idea that we are somehow pure in this way or that way. And in that article, Baba wrote, In cultures that prioritize either-or thinking, either-or monolithic oppositional definitions of sexualities, genders, in an either-or world, anything that occupies a liminal and intersectional and interstitial location is seen as a threat. Whether it be in terms of racial, ethnic identities, religious mixities, those who inhabit interstitial spaces, those who move between worlds, those who are literally fringe dwellers are seen as the ultimate threat. Ibrahim Baba was mixed race. He was the son of a Jew and a Muslim, of a white woman and a black man. He was a Sufi sheikh, and he celebrated Shabbat every Friday night. He was bisexual and polyamorous. He was multi. Categories, and our perception of them and our performance of them, categories have power. Upsetting those categories upsets the hierarchy that is embedded within them. It pisses off the people at the top, but it also unsettles the other side of the binary too. When you upset gender categories, you upset the people invested in them. Men who are really invested in masculinity and being a real man, but also heterosexuals invested in the comfort of the binary, and gay folks who find themselves with solace in the stability of that category. Categories contain rules for behavior. They tell us how to interact with one another, so when you upset them, people can get uncomfortable because they don't know how to interact anymore. People who are dependent on those rules can become angry. The folks on the top who have the most to lose are often the most angry and sometimes even violent in their insistence on maintaining strict categorical conformity. But folks like me, when I was 18, who had never had the veracity of those categories challenged, also feel a vague but unsettling disquiet. How are we supposed to know how to behave without rules around behavior? My very wise friend, the preacher, teacher, and poet, Elena Rose Vera, has a characteristic saying. She said she wants it on her tombstone. I don't know, I mean, it's complicated. We human beings are more complex. We're more complex than a snapshot. And these categories that define our identities matter because of power. They are real in that sense, but transgressing them also matters. The poles of the binary are real, but so is all of the interstitial space between them. We are both and creatures living in a world that tells us constantly that our choices are either or. Even the question of categories itself is a both and, because categories both matter, and they are not independently real from our construction of them. We create and define and perform and challenge categorical realness. As Unitarian Universalists, there is something in us that understands this. We UUs have a deep theological commitment to a spiritual practice of living with ambiguity. We know how to hold multiple belief systems in sacred space at the same time. We know how to make room for more and just one more. May we learn to wear the garments of our identities loose, that we might move within them, that we might change our robes at will, that we might be comfortable in our own and one another's movement. We are all living, unfolding beings in process. That's what it means to be alive. Love fills those interstitial spaces between us, and it is just as diffuse and dispersed as power. May it win again and again and again in this confusion of a moving, dynamic, unfolding world. May it be so, and blessed be.